So you were saying before it got cut off for a reason
Mhm.
that some people say the church is like I'm putting too much emphasis on the church or something.
Yeah, I mean, you could see somebody saying like, "Oh, how could, Christianity or the church be a root of all of these things? Like the failure is the root of a lot of the problematic ideas we're talking about, and it's also the root of whatever is really really good in Western culture, deeply good." And I guess my response would be, well, what would you expect from God incarnate in history? I mean, he becomes the center point of history, not just Western history, but world
Right.
history. And so I
Yeah.
just don't think people like actually think out the consequences of that reality that
Yeah.
God
No,
came into the world, is incarnate, and he says very clearly, he says, I do not come to bring peace. I come to bring a sword. And he also talks about setting I guess it's Jesus says this, I set the world on fire. And I come to set the world on fire. um, and you can think of fire as destructive, but you can also think of it as a love, like a power
yeah.
crossing the earth. And so it's like, hey, Christians, wake up. Like, if you really believe what you say you believe, then Christ is, and his church is going to have the most basic influence on the rest of history. It's just what's going to happen. And I think, so I do think that getting down there into the sort of the roots of it, and saying like, well, maybe a lot of this is either these are either ideas coming out because the church, church hierarchy and Christians and Christian culture has failed deeply, has gone off the rails, or these are ideas or people who are, you know, trying to destroy it. Um,
Right. Well, which is it? Because like you could say that liberalism, as I've described it in many, many, many articles, books, is a counterfeit of the church, and it's ultimately at root a kind of nihilism. It's a self worship, the will to power. It makes options God, and potency is over act, as D.C. Schindler says. And it has this kind of like sense of being like we're all gods, and we're all able to kind of live like gods. We could decide, we could determine our own identity, and we can live in this sort of godlike infinity of choices. And it's completely satanic, but it only exists because of the church and because of its trajectory towards heaven and eternity, and because God became man, so now man can become God. Well, he's going to become God either the right way through the cross and the resurrection, and through receptivity to reality in a Platonic sense,
okay, well, let me just
or
wait.
or he's gonna do it by his will.
I know, I just want to get underneath something you just said.
Yeah.
I think it's important. You were talking about potency and act, and you were saying that could not, that whole idea of putting potency over act could not happen without Christ, without
Yeah.
Christianity. Why
Right.
is that?
Because the the sense that there are like infinite possibilities, and that
Yeah.
there isn't a stable kind of set order of things that's imminent and intractable and inexorable. That's more of a pagan view without a transcendent infinite God, that there's
Hmm.
just an order of things. Christianity comes, there is this possibility of theosis, of becoming infinite, becoming a transcendent being. Um, and that's
Oh, so you're saying like the pagans before Christianity, even maybe Judaism as well. There's a kind of you're under an order and you have a certain part to play, and you you can't, there's a sort of glass ceiling on you in the sense.
right. And there's no sense of like this, the individual either. That's a
Yeah.
creation of post-Christian, kind of
Yeah.
heretical view. Yeah, we are kind of all like the whole world is made for each person. That's what Christ showed us, and we all have this destiny of eternity with God. and
Yeah.
each of us is completely unique, and we're made, almost the whole universe is made just for one person. Okay, but then that's just one side of it. But that side of it, exaggerated, becomes liberal individualism, and all the way to Nietzsche, with the will to power of each individual, creating beyond good and evil.
Okay, so
Uh,
let's talk then about our first other area, which is, so you have the church with this, Christ with this, I made each person, each person is loved by God, known by God. God wants to know each person. There's a kind of a possibility of actually, living with God for eternity. So there's this all of a sudden this open door to, wow, I could be, I'm eternal in a sense as well. Like, that whole thing you're talking about. And then it mutates, for whatever reason, it mutates into, kind of will to power. It mutates into radical individualism,
yeah,
and then of course, wouldn't you think it logical that you might end up with people, individuals who think, they have, wow, they put together like the pagan sense of being kind of a demigod, like,
yeah,
or being sort of the powerful leader like Alexander or Augustus, or some
yeah.
Julius Caesar even.
The world historical figure, Hegel calls them.
Yeah, exactly. Hegelian world historical figure. Wouldn't it make sense that those people would rise, in greater amounts if you have this idea, this kind of almost like twisting of a Christian idea? I
Yeah.
mean, wouldn't that make sense?
All right, now that makes sense. But here's the other way of looking at it. There is a conspiracy among, Freemasons and Satanists and those who hate the church.
Yeah,
Okay, the ones who really, subscribe to a rejection of Christ. Whatever groups are
yeah,
doing that, they know that promoting sexual license, and a kind of autonomy, and is going to destroy the family, and the family unity and ethnic unity and solidarity, which then allows people to become completely vulnerable to the state and to propaganda, and they're guilty, and they're against, they're off, they're not in, centered on the
mm-hmm,
natural law, and so
hmm,
then they could be completely enslaved by their passions, and they could be destroyed in their economic independence, and it's a recipe for enslavement. Okay, and so on the one hand, you have this idea that it's really just based on a Christian heresy, but then there are people who promote it for the sake of their own power over others.
yeah,
uh, and so which is it? Because you know these people who are doing that are really need to be unmasked. They need to be dealt with. They need to be disciplined, and they're criminals. um, and they really exist. There are certain people like Kinsey, and
yeah,
Alfred,
yeah,
Kinsey,
yeah,
and William Reich, and
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
the people who are kind of the architects of the sexual revolution. um, and so what about that aspect of looking at this as a kind of like those are like those are the warriors on the enemy side, and we need to know who they are and what they're doing, and there are more of them. um, I mean, it's not just a matter of a heresy or a cultural deformation. It's just wicked people again, promoting revolutionary ideas, um, of course, masking them as freedom and other things. So, in other words, there's a kind of like a deliberate dishonesty, malicious dishonesty by these people,
mm-hmm,
when they
mm-hmm.
promote these ideas, and then institutions, and they overthrow laws, they overthrow,
Yeah. Well,
cultural
can I
bulwarks.
use an analogy?
Yeah,
So, in your gastrointestinal system, you have you have a huge mixture of, it's a huge microbiome, right? And you have um, you know bacteria that is helpful to the system and helps the system grow. And then you have bacteria that is what's called opportunistic, where it's parasitical. It comes in and it takes over. And the issue that happens, everybody's got a bit of both. Like, your system is just a mixture of these things. And these parasitical forms of bacteria, they're out there, and they have, in a sense, their role out in the world. But the problem is that when they go into a situation where there's overgrowth, so they're called opportunistic because there's a chance, if the person and their gastrointestinal system is not healthy or strong, doesn't have enough of the right bacteria, then the bad kind of bacteria, the bacteria that shouldn't be there, becomes opportunistic, and it starts to overgrow, and then the whole system starts to be taken over, and starts to kind of crash. Um, and so I'm just wondering if so you have these ideas, and you have these heresies, and you have these problems, and I just wonder if that side of things is just the Christian, like the body of Christ in this world, just is just becoming compromised. There's
All
something
right.
that,
So if that happens, if let's say the Christians they lose their salt. This is all Christ
yeah,
talks about, pretty much.
yeah, yeah.
They lose their salt. They are unfaithful. They use their privileged, status as Christians to kind of be opportunistic, like the Pharisees. Um, okay, and so that produces these spiritual, intellectual, viruses, you might say,
Mm-hmm.
that infect, the poor at the most. That they're the ones who hurt the most, right? Your
Yeah,
typical divorced families and
yeah.
people who are just uneducated and just living a kind of Walmart life, wage slaves. The people, the ones that Marx was supposedly concerned about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the left and the Democrats, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it also, what it does is it also empowers the people who are really without conscience and wicked,
They're
the
opportunistic.
opportunists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that happens, and now you have opportunists who wield the weapons of discourse, and
Mm-hmm.
they're really good rhetoricians and sophists, and they know how to get into power, and then they just capitalize on the church's you know auto demolition and compromised state. If you're a Catholic cultural warrior, where do you put your energy into exposing these people who are the ones actually, in the world doing the evil? And I mean, they're not innocent. Okay, they're opportunists and they use it, but they're also criminals.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, odd extra, you try to identify and unmask these evil groups and people and hold them to justice, and don't let them destroy the culture. Or do you focus more on odd intra and making sure that the Catholics are loyal, evangelization to the Catholics? Like Peter Kwasniewski trying to make sure that the Latin Mass is healthy and promoted and vindicated, or theologians within the church, the Communio school. In other words, in-house
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
education. I don't know, like that's getting back to our original question. I think it's I don't know. I just think it's important. Like, right. So let's take the scandemic. Like, we have some agents who are
Well, let
really,
me just say something. I
yeah.
think that my thought about that is that it's a little bit like being in, under attack, invasion, shall we say, and you got this invading force coming. And of course, you want to tell your villagers that these people are coming and who they are, and you want them to be aware of who the enemy is. But it doesn't do you a lot of good if there's nobody to fight. if nobody knows how to fight, they don't even have the tools or the weapons. They don't know how to use them.
Well, they're actually on the side of the enemy.
Well, and then they, that's, I think in some ways that is what tends to happen, is that they just, it's a little bit like in the Lord of the Rings, where Sauron, you know, just decides that he can't win.
Yeah.
And so if you can't beat them, join them. That whole idea that people, betray their own values, and they just
Yeah.
think
Right.
like, oh, I can get along with, these, I can get somewhere in the secular world. I can compromise. I can, in a
Yeah.
sense, live to fight another day. And I
Well,
think sometimes there's wisdom to that, for sure. I think there's definitely wisdom. But what we're talking about is perhaps, and what I tend to see around me is I see people who are like sheep going to the slaughter. This is not, Catholics just kind of going like, well, the government wouldn't do this or do that. And I mean, people have been saying this for years here in the United States, and in Western Europe. Well, our governments are democratic, and they're really saying they have Christian roots, and so why would they turn on us? And you're like, have you studied history? Are you kidding me? Like,
yeah.
as soon as you have things totally untethered from eternal judgment and absolute truth, then you're going to have opportunists come in, and you're going to have a really, you're going to have anything goes. And these people will use, these groups and these people, they will use, whatever they need to use to, whether they have to lie, they have to look like, sheep, they'll be
Yeah.
wolves in sheep's clothing. They don't
Right.
have any scruples.
No.
And the stupider you are, the easier it makes it for them. So I think that,
Yeah.
that
Because
the
they operate by seduction.
yeah, so the odd interest stuff is, I think, actually kind of primary. If you
Yeah.
don't have that, it
It makes.
doesn't matter if they see them,
Yeah.
you know? But
I'm
the
thinking.
add extra stuff is like, maybe it can wake some people up, to the actual problem. People who still have some tools maybe need to be woken up. I don't know.
Well, I'm just thinking of that movie Signs, the Mel Gibson movie.
Oh yeah,
Because in the Signs, the guy is like a faithful Christian. I think maybe he's a pastor. I forgot, but
yeah,
he loses his faith because
yeah,
his wife died, I think, or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
And that's when the aliens came and invaded the whole world. Is because he lost his faith. It's like an allegory.
It is. Yeah,
And when the aliens come, nobody knows how to fight them. They're causing havoc. He's going to lose his children. And in the fight, he gains courage and he realizes that he should have never lost his faith. And he kind of starts to see signs of God's existence and providence. And as soon as he believes in the providence of God again, that's when he can defeat the aliens.
yeah. No, I think it's a great allegory for that, and we
So
we
if
saw
he
that.
if he were just trying to fight them and like didn't even think about whether or not he caused it, because there's a weird way in which this gets us like Dostoevsky with Father Zosimo, right? It's a weird when you see Freemasons or you see Talmudic uh, Jews who really don't know Christ and really think the Pharisees were right and they just think Christian civilization's evil. Freemasons or these New Agers or the transhumanists,
Hmm.
okay, or the militant atheists. When you're fighting them, there's a sense in which you as a member of the Christ body are somehow the cause of that evil. You're seeing your own evil manifest outside yourself or something. I mean that's
Yeah,
the
that's I think a brilliant idea. You brought up Dostoevsky. It's a brilliant idea in orthodoxy. The way that they think about sin, and they think about, sin and goodness, and the way that they think about, the individual's, effect or participation. It's a kind of almost like a doctrine of participation, in a way that we're all so deeply connected. And so my failures, spiritual failures, are going to be, part of the reason why somebody else is doing what they're doing.
right.
And my my goodness or my holiness, my trying to, tie myself back up to God and to do his will in this world is also going to have a kind of cosmic ripple effect.
But there's a satanic version of this it's very important to get this right, okay? Because
Uh,
you could say, look, I'm responsible. I need to be more holy. All
yeah.
these enemies of the church are kind of the fault of Catholics. Blah blah blah. Right? But that doesn't mean you allow them to destroy the Christian culture and the church. If that's some kind of penance, or like they have like you still need to defend Christ and his church and the truth against these people and these groups.
Yeah, I think what you're talking
And
about.
how do you do both? How do you do both?
Well, that's the thing is that it's um I think there's a deep humility in saying, I'm a human person. I'm not a godlike individual, I'm not an elite. It's kind of like being the opposite of these groups you're talking about, where they become elitist groups or psychopaths, where they just think they're better than
Yeah,
everybody else.
that's great evil.
So you go to the opposite and you say, I'm not. I'm in way my failures are part of the problems in the world. Like Chesterton says,
Yeah,
what's wrong with the world? Me.
me.
Right. So there's that kind of radical humility where you don't see yourself as better than other people. You see yourself as in some way down in the trenches, kind of sometimes part of the problem, sometimes part of the
But
solution.
how do you avoid that becoming this false humility of the progressive leftist, you know, just emasculated so-called Catholics who just almost like become friends with the enemy. Like, oh, we're so humble. Oh, we're sorry for what we did. We hurt
Because I
you.
think if you really see evil evil in yourself, if you really see that, then you're going to fight it in yourself, right? And you're going to therefore fight it out wherever you see it. And so it's that kind of like, when you look at it and evil in yourself and you understand the destruction that, like selfishness or, pride, or you see what it does to, people immediately around you, to yourself, to your own soul. When you see how really disgusting that is, then, and you're trying to be a holy person, then I think you are going to fight it outside yourself, because you're going to
Yeah.
you're fighting it in yourself at the same time. I think people who are kind of that, like, oh, I can't say anything because, I'm trying to, like, just, love all people,
Yeah. So we
I
should, we
think
should,
the reality is they really don't see any evil in
no,
themselves.
no, they don't. And so those are the types who are like, oh, you Trumper, weird traditionalist Christians, you're so upset about the drag queens at the story hour in libraries. Oh, you're so awful. These
Yeah.
are people who are just trying to be themselves. Like, okay, no, no, we're
No, because
talking about
exactly, because exactly when you're off track in terms of the moral law and natural law, you cause destruction around you. Everybody knows that that is true in their own lives. And if you don't know that, you're really kind of crazy.
yeah,
So, it's very, very basic. If you're aware of what it does in your own immediate life, then you're going to be very much more clear about seeing it around you and making the distinction between, people who are doing things because they're weak, because they're afraid, and people who are doing things because they're selfish and they think they're better. I mean, it becomes a little easier to see because you're not so busy trying to compromise with it, because you don't compromise with it in yourself. And it's not like I'm advocating, going around, beating yourself up. I'm just saying people who just really decide, I want to be holy. I want to be with God. I want to love God, and I want to follow his will. If people really desire that, then the next step is you start seeing in yourself more and more clearly what does not line up with that. Once you see that in yourself and you understand how bad it is, then I think you can see it you can see it with others, and you can see it much more clearly. Like, what does Christ say? First take the log out of your own eye, right? And he says, then you can see to help your neighbor. He doesn't say just take the log out of your own eye and then just don't bother with
No,
people.
he
He
says
says,
you need to remove the
yes,
speck in your neighbor's eye.
yes. So, but you first have to see it in yourself.
Yeah.
You first have to understand clearly what it is. And we're not God, and we have our own experience and our own sort of human limited version of experience. And so we have to see it in ourselves before we can actually deal with it in anybody else. So to me, that's the kind of person, the most humble people. You'll notice, you'll look around. I mean, I just see it more and more. These people we talk about who come out and are speaking out and just saying things, and they're like, kind of like, there's a kind of, not innocence, but there's a sort of just down to earthness about
Yeah.
them, where they just say, I just listened to one lady today, somebody, a nurse, Shimarami or something like that, her name, and she just said, the lady said, oh, you seem like you're fearless, you're fighting, and she says, what makes it so that you're not afraid? And the nurse said, I'm a Christian. I know what is right. I know what we're called to. I know what we're meant to be as human beings. I understand, you know, how people are supposed to be treated, and I know it when I see it not happening. And she said, I just know that there's judgment on every
Yeah.
every one of our actions, and so I have to
Yeah.
I have to act.
It's similar to, like, I've noticed the way that I've been able to discipline students lately, like the last year. Like,
Hmm.
I really see myself like, oh man, that's hard. Like, what you have to go, like, it's hard to overcome this problem. And
Yeah,
man, I mean, I don't know. I've been able to overcome it, but it's God's grace. It's nothing. I mean, it's really hard. And so I'm simultaneously sympathetic and compassionate, but I'm not doing it the fake thing. I'm not trying. I'm not like,
no,
flattering them or being like,
yeah,
spoiling them, or like, I actually say no, you can't do that. But I think I give off the sense that, like, I've struggled with it and I know it's hard. And I found that the students really can sense this.
yeah, they can.
They can really sense it, and you know what it does? It makes them more able to overcome it somehow. I don't know. I've just
Yeah, yeah, because they don't feel attacked
They
as
don't feel judged, but they also
yeah,
don't feel like you're just being like, oh, you're such a good person. Oh, it's okay.
yeah. No, it's like
Not doing.
you have their good in mind, but you're coming at it from a very, hey, I'm a fellow human, fellow traveler,
Yeah.
and
No,
I'm not
exactly.
above you. I'm not above you.
No, I'm not. And there's some
Yeah,
things I've been able to overcome, but some of them I can't. And it's also my job to try to help you overcome them because I'm in charge.
yeah,
So yeah, I guess, but then it's not. That's not really always true about every student. Or, I mean, the analogy would be like people who are just bad. You know,
yeah. I mean, I think there's,
Just
I've had we've both had students like that where they're really, I don't know what's going on with them, but
they're
at
just
some
missing on
point, yeah,
their
you
mind.
realize that they're sort of beyond your ability to reach them, because they've taken themselves almost outside of that whole paradigm,
Yeah, they
and
have. They're
somehow
not goodwill. They're not goodwilled. That's
yeah,
the problem.
they're not good-willed, and you just don't know why that's happening. A lot of times I feel like there's been either an extreme version of at home or somewhere else of, you have to either be the best and
Yeah,
you are the best, or the other extreme, you're the worst. Those kind of people who've had that, either of those real extremes, I feel like they're it's much harder for them to relate to other people normally.
yeah,
And it's just, sometimes it's just really hard to deal with them and relate to them, and they end up, you end up having to just say, I'm sorry, but I have to look to the common good. I mean, I've had to say this to students before. It's like, I am sorry for whatever's happened to you, but your behavior is such that I have to look to the common good. And then you send them up the line. They have to go and deal with the consequences, and I can't
Yeah.
help them. So it's like at that point, I think in terms of fighting with these people, or fighting with some of the forces out there, it's like the discernment is huge. And I think, people trying to help. I think everybody's needed. I think the academics talking about the ideas and giving people a sense of either Christian failures or cultural trends that people are subject to, and then also understanding, maybe some of these forces at work, and what they might be, getting into some of these theories and trying to understand them, so that we can pinpoint what's happening, and try to defend people.
What do we do with the secret occult societies that are really rich and wealthy, and the groups that
Mm.
do pedophilia and child sex trafficking, and the ones who are deliberately trying to poison the whole population and kill them and depopulate them? I mean, these are real. They exist. They
And
need to be stopped. They need to be exposed. And I still don't see the connection between like the priority of unmasking these people and not being fooled by their lies and getting a massive resistance to these elites, who are transhumanists, who are satanic, Luciferian, Freemasonry, whatever you want to call it. They just need to be, you know, I mean, dealt with in a very strong way. Okay, like they're not going to be convinced that it's not about bad ideas; they're just wicked.
well,
And
I
then,
think,
I mean, on the one hand, that's a priority. On the other hand, the priority is to evangelize and to do intellectual work to make sure that we understand the society we're in, culture we're in, and what orthodoxy should look like, and to unmask liberalism and to unmask the scapegoating and all the stuff I've done, modernity as apocalypse. Those two seem both priorities to me.
well, I think they are. I think that what's going to happen is, and what is happening is that, when you look at the big picture, you look at all these different causes and what's going on. I feel like it's, as St. Paul said, it's, we don't fight against flesh and blood. Ultimately,
Yeah.
it's powers and principalities. And so in the end, I think it's, trying to figure out what you do best, and then having the faith that God is going to bring people up in areas where they're needed, because it is not something that I think one group or one, one person or is going to be able to deal with on their own.
Yeah.
I think it's figuring out, what you do best. I think the thing that's very sad and very damaging and destructive is when people who are basically on the same side, are not, they're just ridiculing each
Yeah.
other.
No, they're like they're policing the discourse. Okay, and this is the
Yeah.
academics, because they're in institutions and little tribal, groups where they have to kind of demonize the other people who are going into the trenches and really trying to
Mhm.
expose stuff. And you know what? They won't do it, or they can't do it, but they don't just keep their mouth shut and leave them alone. They demonize them and they mock them. You know,
Yeah, I mean, again, I think what happens is it's a kind of, it all goes down to that kind of elitism. People in their little spheres, they start to think that their sphere is the sphere,
yeah,
and that they're doing the most important work, and they're the most important people. And so they see other areas as being, just something laughable. And the whole conspiracy theorist thing, I think has been so wildly successful, from, if you want to look at the point of view of the forces trying to divide and conquer. I mean, that was just, using language like Joseph Pieper
that
talks
was
about.
the CIA who did that, with a J.
No, I know, but Joseph Pieper talking about, the abuse of language, and
I
I
know.
mean, that's the one thing I've seen. I mean, it's happened all through human history, but I feel like in an information age, a social media age, where people are so dependent upon, words and language to, communicate, because face to face stuff is sometimes difficult, that, you get these definitions of things. You get these terms being thrown around, they're weaponized, and language has become weaponized. And so I just feel like that has been so divisive and so difficult, and people are so, but ultimately I think when Christians are too afraid of not being in the right group,
Yep.
um, we're screwed.
No,
We're
I agree.
screwed.
There's nothing worse than that.
I
There's nothing
mean,
worse than that, because that's exactly why you become a Christian, because you're
yeah.
putting your group identity and your tribalism and your scapegoat, your need to scapegoat as your primary gods. You're not doing that. Christ saves you from that. And if you think you're going to be a good Christian Orthodox and then also do the tribal thing, the scapegoating thing, the virtue signaling thing, you
Mhm.
are you're going to be vomited from God's mouth.
Well, yeah, and that's because the sort of locus of cultural advantage shifted somewhere. And I'm sure it was somewhere in the Enlightenment period, American and French, revolutions. But some, in Lockeanism probably, where somehow the cultural, locus of advantage shifted, and it went to the state, right? Or it went to the
Yeah.
secular reality. Like there's this kind of secular reality where you have business and you have politics and you have, you know, um, all of the different avenues of making money and having power. And that became sort of the overarching reality. And then the Christians are trying to, at first, they have a lot of influence in it. And then they're in a position where they're trying to maintain their influence in it. And then they're in a position where they're trying to get influence.
Yeah.
The problem is that we're trying to get influence and trying to be part of a system that is, like we were talking before, is in a way a kind of Christian heresy.
Yeah.
It's trying to be something, trying to be a church when it's not a church. It's trying, um, it's trying to take on the role of defining the good of human existence. And when that happens, and you got Christians trying to sort of be a part of that, that is that's a really bad situation, because that overarching, you know that overarching apparatus is going to become the thing that determines what you can say and what you can't say, and what kind of person you can be and what you can't.
It's
And that's another failure on the part of Christians. Solzhenitsyn talks about
yeah.
this in his Harvard address of 1978. He said, we've lost people of courage who are willing to just, be on the outskirts, be on the fringes. And he said, even in 1978, he's like, all of the good academics, all of the good, people who care about truth, who care about these things, they're marginalized in a culture
Yeah.
that does not care about truth anymore and doesn't want to hear it. It just wants comfort. It just wants, more monetary power, more military power. And you're losing people who actually have that virtue of courage. And I think about Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy Jr., because he's trying, you can see he's trying to take after his father and his uncle, who I think had issues, obviously moral issues and stuff, but they were trying to be, principled people, at least in politics. And I feel like he's trying to follow in their footsteps, and he's just been so ostracized over and over and over again. But
Yeah.
he just kind of stays with it. He stays there. And I feel like, even though I kind of doubt he's a practicing Catholic, I don't know, but he's, in a sense, he's trying to be one of those people of courage. I think he sees that as an ideal, and we just need more people like that. And that's supposed to be a Christian virtue. You're supposed to have, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying, but I just feel like it's this it's this kind of desire to be part of the the power structure.
It's the inner circle. We're
Yeah, and it's like you start doing that, and you're like C.S. Lewis says, you're now compromised.
well, and so the big problem is we have compromised Catholics, a compromised pope, compromised bishops, and we have a compromised culture. And then we've got really, really evil, wicked people taking advantage of this, causing the compromise.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
now,
you've got opportunistic.
they're actually threatening you if you don't compromise. Um, and
Yeah.
so you have those two battles.
You
So
do. And just like in the, time of Pharaoh, in the Exodus time, God ramps up the plagues in a sense. They become
yeah,
worse and worse
that's
because
exactly what's happening right now.
yeah, because I think, I'm thinking about Europe right now, and I we're not exempt from what's happening there. What I think it will come here too, but you're seeing people be squeezed out of their income, out of their ability to live, out of their ability to pay for their heating, their groceries.
Germany, it's happening in Germany.
Yeah, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in Germany, and it's this kind of squeezing of people, and it may get to a point where you get a lot of people starting to go, wait a minute, waking up and starting to look beyond the power structure for
Yeah.
some other way,
Well,
to actually survive.
that
I don't know. What's that?
there's already a lot of people who have never woken up to the evils of the power
Oh yeah.
culture because of the scandemic, and the evil people always go too far. They always do. They can't help it. So
Yeah,
people,
that is another interesting thing. It's like the in the Exodus where it talks about God talking about hardening Pharaoh's heart, and it's the verb, the Hebrew verb, as far as I remember studying it, is there's two hardens. It's like hardening it in terms of not caring, and then hardening it in terms of like getting making the person more sort of ready for battle, courageous, right? So there's a positive spin on it, and that's the word that's used in Exodus, is the latter form, which is God's almost strengthening Pharaoh, like giving him a will to fight. It's such a weird thing to use in that situation, because you think, yeah, enemy of Israel, why wouldn't God weaken Pharaoh? Well, in a sense, you can see God at work, because he's saying, come out and really, yeah, let's see who you really are. Be who you really are.
yeah.
Um, come out and show your colors.
Well,
You
it's
know,
not
and
allowed.
that is one of the, and what when you're talking about people seeing the enemy and us pointing out, the enemy,
Yeah,
and people who are kind of asleep, it's like sometimes God has to do that, and he has to do that through sort of strengthening those people so that they
yeah,
start to come out themselves
yeah.
and
And then when
and
they
show themselves,
become
because like people saying, hey, that person's your enemy, if somebody's really kind of in mass formation
right,
or asleep or compromised themselves, um, then they're just not going to listen
no,
to
and
you.
I think that's what the latest CDC thing was of
Oh, with
endorse,
the kids.
endorsing the shots for the children. I think that
Yeah.
woke up a lot of people.
Yeah, it
I
did. It
hope
reminded me of the firstborn. You get to the level of where people's children are being
it's just
put in harm's way,
so
and
purely evil for no reason. I mean, it's just there's just no hiding it.
yeah, and there were a lot of, I think there were a lot of doctors starting to go, wait. Like, I mean, if they're not at this point, I don't know
Oh,
what's gonna.
if they're not, they're just evil.
I know.
Lost. Well, good. This was good. I think I got a lot to think about. Maybe we came to some conclusions. Hope
Yeah,
our listeners were helped by this conversation. And I
all
did just
five of them.
I did just post an essay called "Metaphysical Courage" on my Substacks, an old essay I wrote. So related to you're talking about courage, so you guys can check that
Yeah.
out. And yeah, we took off a few weeks. We were kind of sick, so hopefully we'll get back to doing this once a week. So thank you, Renee, and
Yeah.
God bless everybody, and keep up the resistance. Take care.